Welcome to the Tech Panel.
1, 2, 3, 4.
The podcast where tech minds meet.
It's an absolute pleasure to have you on the show, mate. My name's Arvin. I'm a host on the show alongside Emma Glasson, and we've also got Matt Finnegan, on the end of Zoom. It's a pleasure to have you on the show today. How you doing?
Yeah, thanks very much. It's great. Drove up from Brizzy, had a nice drive, so it's a pleasure to be here.
Not too much traffic.
Wasn't too
Always
bad
traffic.
today. Yeah.
But we were just joking about how it doesn't matter what direction you're traveling, as long as it's between the Sunshine Coast and Brisbane, there's going to be an accident on the road, and it's going to delay you.
Absolutely. I guess, just to start, Jason, what inspired the creation of Halo Connect? And I guess, how did you identify, the problem that you're solving?
Yeah, sure. So I guess the current state of affairs for sort of trying to have a product that integrates with like a general practice, a medical practice around Australia, it's really, really difficult. There's big barriers to entry, and the founders of Halo kind of have a product that does that, and put a lot of sunk cost into essentially developing these like database connectors that you then have to get installed at all the different practices that you want to sell your product to. Got to work with their IT providers to maintain that, and there's costs related to the data extraction and all those kinds of things, and they're kind of sitting around being like, there has to be an easy way to do it.
Absolutely.
And I guess in a similar vein, the medical software industry has kind of been lobbying the federal government for decades around how to make the interoperability of these medical systems better and move data around and get access to it. And there hadn't been a lot of movement from the federal government in that space. So really that's how Halo was born. It was like, okay, we have, almost 10,000 medical practices across Australia that have on-premise databases, or it's all locked away in this tiny silo. It's really hard to get access to create, these great digital health products that are going to help patients, help clinicians. How can we create something that just lets us connect to an API that then, lets us talk to any practice around Australia and, create these awesome digital health products off the end of it.
Interesting. When I think about this, I kind of imagine in my head what my takeaway from that is. These healthcare providers have probably localized storage information being stored. And you're saying essentially you act as a middleman and you take what was sort of an old school server-based solution and make it so it could connect to the broader world of integrators that exist in the market day.
Yeah, absolutely. It's that middleware. It's that kind of creating a bridge from an on-premise world to a cloud world, and letting the people making the digital health tools live in cloud world without having to worry about the local database sync and things like that.
And what types of value are you unlocking for these types of customers if they're able to actually build a system like that? Yeah,
one of the main things is that they can actually just focus on their product.
Yeah.
So they don't have to worry about that database sync. They don't have to worry about working with the practices IT providers. These are like 6,000 plus individual businesses around Australia that have all their own sort of managed IT providers and things like that. And it can literally take, 2-3 weeks to have that managed IT provider help them install something locally in the practice just to get the product up and running. And, by that time, the practice manager or the clinicians kind of lost interest in the product. They're busy people, they've moved on, and it didn't work. Okay, don't worry about it kind of thing. So it really allows them to just focus on their core product, focus on the workflows behind it, because the data should just move seamlessly so they can focus on the user experience and the workflow for the clinician and not have to worry about this other bit of tech that kind of doesn't really add a whole lot of value at all. And then kind of not have to worry about the support model of what it takes to keep those connections live, across thousands and thousands of practices across Australia as well. It's like, okay, well, if it's not working, I just lodge a support ticket with Halo, or, we actually proactively monitor all of the site connectivity. And as soon as we see something drop off, I think it's like a minute and a half that it's not connected, we get alerted. We start contacting the practice and make sure that it's up and running again. So yeah, I guess really creating that sort of, if you've got a digital health tool, you just have to worry about your digital health tool, and everything else sort of takes care of itself.
So it's not just a technical facelift that connects them. You're actually providing some really solid quality of life features in there to make their life easier at the same time.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's essentially, tools for developers.
Yeah.
And which is, hilarious, having no tech background at all and trying to be the the CEO of a tech company building tools for developers. But yeah, we listen to what those tech companies want out of the APIs and build those features. The other sort of core aspect of Halo and what we're trying to work towards is that more general interoperability of the system. So we've got two real API products. The first one is, really built around all of those current 100+ integrators that have had that sunk cost of working with a SQL database and writing a bunch of custom SQL, figuring out what stored procedures they need to use. They're now being asked to ditch, their database connectors and use an API. So we wanted to create something that they could just kind of lift and shift. So our first API is a sort of pure SQL pass-through. So allows them to take all their existing code and just, instead of having to have a local database connector, they can point it to an API. They can build a cloud version of their product if they haven't got one already, because, they've been living in an on-prem world and not worry too much about how to talk to the database. But where we're headed is FHIR APIs, which is a data standard in healthcare, which was, funnily enough, created in Australia by this absolute legend called Graham Grieve, and he's done work. He's been to the White House and worked with the American system to implement it over there.
Really?
But Australia's been really, really slow to take it up, and we're kind of hopefully leading that charge a little bit of creating FHIR APIs for these old on-premise systems, doing all the translation ourselves, and then as a third-party digital health product, you can then talk to multiple practice management systems using the same standard, same set of APIs, and hopefully we take all that work away from people.
Yeah, that's crazy. And I guess off the back of that, what led you to being the CEO of Halo Connect?
Good question. It's a bit, I guess my personal history is I sort of grew up around healthcare. My dad was a doctor. His brother was a doctor. Mum was a nurse before becoming a prosecutor, because that's what you do.
Wait, what? That's not a normal trajectory for a nurse.
And I kind of always just thought growing up, I guess I'm going to be a doctor, because that's what medical families are a bit like that.
Yeah.
But I was, working in hospitals and got to uni and was studying science, and I had friends doing medicine, and, my housemate was doing medicine. I was kind of slight existential crisis of it's not actually like looking all that appealing.
Yeah.
It's really a vocation, whereas I kind of like a bit of variety. I couldn't see myself doing the same thing, every day. My dad's friends were like coming out of retirement multiple times because like that was their life. They'd come home early from like family holidays overseas to get back to work and stuff like that. And it didn't seem all that appealing. So,
oh, man.
And then my dad actually had an accident, was quadriplegic for about 10 years before he passed away.
Sorry to hear that, mate.
Oh, really?
And we got, I guess through that, we got the flip side of the healthcare industry of, being a consumer of it for a decade and kind of seeing the best and the worst of it from that perspective. And I guess, unfortunately, the worst of it is what sticks in your mind more so than the really good experiences that you had.
Yeah.
But that was a very tumultuous time. I think I dropped out of uni multiple times during that and kind of got a bit lost, but eventually finished my degree. I was incredibly lucky to get a grad position at Ernst & Young in their like healthcare management consulting branch, which I don't know, they kind of took a chance on me, I guess, because I guess by that time I'd been working in hospitals for a long time. And I think, the very first project that I had on that was assessing all of Queensland Health's readiness to shift to statutory independent bodies and separate health services based in geographic areas. And so EY was like assessing them on 170 different indicators on what it takes to run a health service. And all of a sudden it was like this amazing, experience for the first 6 months of that job. So I did that for a few years. It's consulting. So when there's not much work happening in healthcare, you kind of got to be doing other things. So I was starting to do work in banking and different sectors that I wasn't really that interested in, having sort of been around healthcare my entire life.
Yeah.
And being quite passionate about it after what happened with Dad as well. And then, so I ended up at Queensland Health in the department, did a lot of clinical redesign work. So sort of implementing new models of care, trying to improve access to services. And then a good stint at the kids hospital in Brizzy, which I really loved. I was sort of the head of their improvement and innovation function, doing, basically big clinical redesign projects that would take 9+ months to actually implement a change.
Yeah.
But I kind of grew a little bit tired and cynical of some of that work, like trying to drive change in these massive public hospitals.
Yeah.
You know, there's only so many times you can hear like a clinical leader say to you, oh, I've heard this all before. It's not going to work. Nothing will change. I don't know why you're bothering. And kind of, you know, you're kind of sitting there being like, well, you're the actual real leader here. You have the potential to make this change. I'm just a project officer trying to, you know, get everyone on the same page about things.
Absolutely.
And so, yeah, over time, I guess you get a bit cynical. I think the COVID kind of contributed to it as well. So our team didn't have a lot to do during COVID because there was a lot of change happening, and it was fantastic, and it was really, really fast, but it was very externally driven.
Yeah.
You know, the department's like, here are the 20 requirements every day that your operational teams need to implement, you know, right now. So that sort of, you know, improvement science, clinical redesign type stuff wasn't really well suited for that. So, you know, we wrote a lot of COVID plans. We did a lot of like checkbox exercises of just chasing people up and saying, hey, did you do that thing that you said you were going to do? And then, yeah, so I guess the other aspect of it, you know, sort of how I got from that into tech startup was, you know, I had this role title as the sort of head of improvement and innovation. I'm like, innovation is getting more and more tethered to technology.
Yeah.
And I actually don't know anything about technology. So I'm interested in getting a bit of a deep dive in that world. I've kind of like philosophically never had like a real 5-year career plan of like where to next. So I've kind of always just tried to do a good job in what I'm doing, tried to always be learning something new and then, you know, be open to opportunities. So this came up. I had a decent network of people through EY and Queensland Health and whatever else. And I was lucky enough to know the guys who started Agenic Ventures, which is a sort of tech startup incubator in Brizzy. And I was chatting to them about, hey, I don't know what I want to do next, but, you know, it'd be great to be in technology. And they introduced me to one of the founders of Halo, and sort of we clicked straight away, and went from there.
That's awesome.
That is a wild journey.
Yeah.
You had a really amazing sort of entryway into your industry as well. That's very fortunate to you. What was that like, sort of just jumping straight into something I imagine many junior people will aspire to get into as a pretty senior position, wouldn't it be?
Yeah, I guess like EY is, I think, a lot of those big four places, I think, are amazing places to start your career.
Yeah.
I definitely didn't look at, you know, the directors and the partners and think that's really what I want to be doing. But I do think you get like 10 years worth of experiences in about 3 years, because I reckon I was 2 months in and I'm sitting in the corner of a room, mostly just taking notes, but that room has got this future health service board, future health service executive for this region, you know, for Metro South or something, presenting to a fake board made up of like experts across Australia that are doing the work for EY. And this is and they're doing like a mock first board presentation for when they're going to be in charge about their whole organization and how it's working. And I'm like, you know, I'm a grad. This is 3 months in, and I get to listen to these amazing executives.
Absolutely.
You know, having this really, really robust discussion around their financials and, you know, the clinical outcomes and all these kinds of stuff. And you just don't get that kind of experience in many other jobs.
No.
And I think a lot of people always think there's so much learning opportunity for me in this new role that I'm taking on. But given how, I don't know, mature that position was, and you're a pretty junior person, I think probably one of the more bigger key takeaways for you is, what did that teach you about yourself going into that job, right? I don't think many people get that opportunity. They do that very staggered. I start here at the very junior role, and I work my way up, and you got into a pretty decent job. What were some things that you did learn about yourself as a key takeaway?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think I guess I didn't really, when I got the job, I was just looking for any job, really.
Well, you got one.
That's crazy.
Because I had come off the back. I think it took me 11 years to get a 3-year degree in the end. And I'd done a lot of part-time jobs, and it was, you know, I was much older at that point and sort of needed to sort my life out. And I was applying for these sort of professional jobs left, right, and center. And I kind of, somebody, like a friend of mine recommended that I should put in for this grad program because they're great places to work. And I think originally I was technically applying for the internal audit part of the business because that's where the most roles were.
Yeah.
But I like sort of as I went through the grad recruitment process and you do all this testing and interviews and whatever else, and they talk about your experience, they were like, you can join the healthcare consulting team, go for that. I was like, okay.
That's amazing though.
Yeah, I think the things that it taught me is I love learning on the job.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not a fantastic book learner. I like listening to podcasts and various other things to learn about topics. But uni, I really struggled with the structure of it.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually just needed to be thrown into the deep end and like figure it out with a bunch of smart people around me. And that really worked for me for some reason.
How funny is that? We've had a lot of conversations now with executives and business startups, and they're telling us very similar information. They were not very inclined when it came to university, but as soon as they were put into a position where they could start a business, they flourished.
Yeah.
Do you think there's some truth to that you're finding with other people in similar positions to yourself?
Yeah, I guess I think about my role as a bit of a generalist role. And so I think it matches the type of personality that likes a lot of variety, that, you know, can be thrown at any kind of random task and be a safe pair of hands and do a good job with it.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things that I've really missed about my old roles is that I was essentially the more experienced management consultant in a team of management consultants, and I could give them a bunch of one-on-one mentoring and really give my professional opinion to help grow them and stuff like that. Whereas now I'm this like one generalist in this business of specialists where we've got software developers, product managers, tech support, data analysts, and they can all do their job way better than I could ever do it. And missing that sort of like, well, what value from a mentoring perspective can I really bring to them? And I hope that, some of that, leadership and management style stuff is rubbing off. But yeah, it's a stark difference to being a generalist is very, very different, I think, to being a specialist. And yeah.
Yeah. And I guess I love that though, because I think every business needs to have that leader, that they learn from, and also, I guess, work with and work, as a team. Matt, do you want to go?
Yeah, absolutely. I guess, Jason, a question that kind of came straight to my mind as you're kind of going through your background. You've got an interesting perspective that you're kind of consulting in the healthcare industry. You're now a CEO of a technology company in the healthcare industry. I'm always kind of fascinated that there seems to be like a stereotype in healthcare that it's slow to move. It doesn't use a lot of technology. But from the sounds of it, it's actually kind of dependent on technology. Healthcare doesn't happen unless you've got these systems in place. So there's quite an interesting dichotomy of it's slow to move, it doesn't like to adapt technology, but yet it's dependent on technology. Is that kind of accurate to say? Or what's your perspective on it, I guess?
Yeah, I think there is definitely some truth to that. I think back to time in the Department of Health working in, a technology replacement program, and you've got a doctor who wants to replace their endoscopy stack because it's very, very old, but they actually want to replace it with the same old technology stack because they don't want to have to learn something new, even though the newer one, has proven better patient outcomes. The screen resolution is much better. So when you're actually looking in someone's bowel, you can tell what's there. So there's definitely an element of truth to it. But I think the flip side is a lot of the actual innovation in healthcare is stuff that is different to a lot of other industries. So people don't really think about it, where it's, we've developed this amazing new cancer drug that is now treating people that we've never been able to treat before, or we've created this PET scanner that does this amazing thing. And those things make their way into healthcare, and they're incredible innovations, but they don't really do a lot for I guess from a staff experience perspective. They're not this cool tool that is on the computer that somebody is using to make their life easier.
Yeah.
Those kinds of things. And so I think a lot of change is constantly happening in healthcare, but it's not kind of the same sort of change that we see in a lot of other industries.
And I kind of imagine that's probably going to be part of healthcare's nature, right? They're kind of a product-led business. The product being their doctors, their nurses, the physical staff that they have, and then, like you said, the MRIs, the drugs, right? Maybe they, and I'm spitballing here, maybe that's just they see the value in that first and foremost, and not actually the data that could drive successful business initiatives. Do you think there's some truth in that?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a concept in healthcare improvement and innovation called the quadruple aim, which is really about you should always be trying to strive to improve patient outcomes, patient experience, staff experience, and lower cost. And that's the sort of holy grail. If you can have a project that does all four, then it's a gold star project. That basically never happens. And actually, a lot of those things are trade-offs from each other. And I think 95+% of innovation in healthcare is actually just that one quadrant of improving patient outcomes. And it often comes at the expense of cost. So great new drug costs $200,000, per dose. Can we put that on, the pharmaceutical benefit scheme, please? And then tax dollars go up. But I think often also what's missed is that it's often at the expense of staff experience, for one. So, we're putting in this electronic medical record and you get a little bit of training, but you just got to deal with it, basically, because now it's going to track all the medication errors that we're making so we can make sure we're improving that. And funnily enough, like in my career of clinical redesign, it used to be called the triple aim, and staff experience wasn't in there.
Oh,
really?
And it's been adapted over time to include that, because I think everyone clued on to, like, every innovation that we make is great at improving patient outcomes, but it's, we're making things worse for our clinicians with every, thing that we do and try to improve.
It's interesting. It's good to hear that they're focused primarily, it sounds like, on patient outcomes, but it is kind of sad that you're right, that they were not focused primarily or one of their primary focuses wasn't on their internal staff. That's probably led, obviously, to some of the outcomes that we're dealing with right now. So help me understand, like, for businesses that are not taking advantage of tools like yours, what kind of inefficiencies are they apt to run into?
Yeah, I think about the sort of average general practice in Australia. The last, 5+ years has kind of been horrible for them. They've had to live through COVID and, implement all the vaccine mandates from the federal government to, like, deliver that to the population while trying to run a profitable business, while trying to avoid getting communicable diseases that, you've got a lot of older doctors out there with comorbidities and things like that. So they've had to live through that at the front line. They also are dealing with a lot more chronic disease in the general population, and the funding model hasn't really adapted to that. Like, a lot of the Medicare rebates haven't increased even with inflation. So they're getting paid less for every consultation that they do. There's a lot of workforce shortages, a lot of, fragmentation of care and that kind of stuff. So they've kind of got to a point, as an outsider looking in, that they just don't have the time and headspace to really take advantage of this, like, exploding digital health ecosystem around them. And because the barrier to entry has been really quite high to have these integrated products as well, like, when they do come across a product, it requires them to go to a different system, enter data twice, these kinds of things that they just do not have the time to do, really, if they're trying to run a profitable practice, and compared to specialists, they're already making less as a GP. So, they really have to churn patients to make it up with the current funding model. So I think what's great about Halo is that it's a bit of an enabler in this space. And my hope is that we can make it really, really easy for all of these digital health products to have, one, we take care of the sort of the data flow back and forth, so it can be an integrated product, but also lets them just focus on that clinician's workflow and make that experience fantastic, so that, they might have to leave their practice management system to go to something else, but they're never doing double data entry. Everything's moving back and forth as it should, and they can make the most out of this tool, whether that's for, like, business intelligence or patient engagement or, an AI that's writing their clinical notes during their consultations so that they don't have to do any of that. There's a lot of automation of workflows type stuff that they can take advantage of.
Do you think there's some level of ignorance that exists within the medical industry today, where they just simply don't understand what the potential of leveraging their data can actually, what type of value that can unlock for the business?
Yeah, it's a really interesting dichotomy because doctors are very scientifically driven, data-driven people in their clinical practice. But in terms of improving the way that they do their work, I think that gets left behind a lot. And so, I think there's a bit of don't know what's out there. There's a bit of, even if I was showing it, the first thing that I have to do that's slightly inconvenient, I'm not interested because I don't have the headspace for that. So I think there's plenty of barriers to them, taking up a lot of these digital health tools. There's also, consumers are now getting much more involved in different platforms and recording their own health data, but there's no real way to get that back into the system that the clinician uses. So from a clinician's perspective, they're all kind of useless. They're all things that we're trying to solve.
This, again, I'm thinking back to like the nature of the medical industry, and obviously I have a limited perspective. Do you think that's probably driven off the back of how they're trained as individuals, always looking outward? There's not much time or energy that directed back towards inward focusing on how you can actually improve processes as a business. They're more, again, focused on what's coming in. How do we focus external factors? How do we focus on external factors and making quality of life better, and sort of just leaving their own internal processes to the wayside?
Yeah, one thing that I love about healthcare is it's very patient focused, and always has been. And the clinician is always going to put the patient first at their own expense. And a bunch of the tools that are out there that are used are more about the patient than they are about the practice and the clinician's workflow and improving that already. Because again, they have this just bias towards improving patient outcomes, doing the best thing for the patient. And I guess my hope is that where we're headed is that they can start to piece together a bunch of different software to help with that whole quadruple aim. So you're going to have great stuff that's going to improve, AI tools that are going to make it much easier to, diagnose your patient, get better treatment outcomes for them. You're going to have things that improve their experience because they can use an app that records their own data, and that data is going to flow seamlessly back into the doctor's system. You're going to improve your own workflow because you're going to have an AI listening to your consult, writing all the notes in a structured way for you, with a bit of clinical review to make sure it hasn't done anything wacky, but to save you lots of time. And overall, it's going to either save you money or allow you to earn more money because it's going to be way more efficient.
Is that like part of your product mission, is to help change the perspective of the healthcare industry to say, look, you're already doing some things really, really great, like focusing on these external factors like your patients. With data, you can sort of still continue not constantly and consistently directing energy towards different direction in the business, but still get the benefit of collecting all that information in a way that can be leveraged in a meaningful way for the business.
Yeah, definitely part of our mission is, I've seen even from like the existing product suite that's out there, that's integrated, let alone like the new ones that are coming in. There are so many amazing products out there that I could never have dreamt of with, these incredibly smart people working on with great user interfaces and stuff like that. And where I see Halo playing a role, as that middleware is basically how can we make that platform as seamless as possible? So these people who are inventing these amazing tools can get them in front of clinicians to use them and patients. And for them not to have to worry about anything underneath, the data's flowing, it's seamless, there's great workflows. And there's like no more barriers as to why they shouldn't use those tools.
Sure.
I think that's, and this is probably not even relevant to just healthcare. It's almost any industry where these companies have like deeply integrated software and they want to use all of this greatest and latest new tech. But if it doesn't connect to their integrated software, then you're talking about double entry, you're talking about risks of things getting inputted incorrectly. And then suddenly all of this value that you're trying to realize from this new tech is lost. So I think it's quite interesting, like what you guys are doing as that middleware is you're allowing kind of this healthcare professionals to kind of leverage this new tech without having to change their bones of their kind of systems. And I guess on that, like for like any industry, like what do you kind of see as just like three top kind of benefits of having this connected ecosystem?
Yeah, I think one, there's competition. So there's been a lot of these new AI tools that do listen to your console and write your notes. And, you know, a couple of the different practice management system vendors have sort of partnered with one of them, you know, and there's like varying levels of quality and cost and all this kind of stuff. And if you're a clinician and you're using this system and you only have one option, that's not great. But if there's 20 that are all integrated in the same way, because it's much easier to do, and they all stress the importance of different parts of the, you know, what the AI can do. They all have different cost models. If you're a rural GP, you're probably not going to be able to, you know, you may not be looking at the same tool as like a metro GP that's got, you know, 50 GPs working in this massive complex. And so I think having that competition and having the variety of different tools at your disposal is really great.
Yeah,
definitely.
I think just having the different practices will still use tools that aren't integrated. And that obviously causes a lot of inefficiency. It costs time. It means that patients aren't getting, like, not as many patients are getting through the system as they could, or they're not getting as much time one-on-one with the clinician. And so I think the other thing that, you know, hopefully this work will do is just remove a lot of that all of the products that are out there have no real excuse now not to be integrated in some way, and making that clinician's life easier, that patient's life easier. The other thing that I'm kind of really excited about as a prospect is bringing in all that consumer data. So there's no real consolidated way to do that at the moment. There's no good there is a good standard out there with FHIR, but no one's really using it because every general practice is like a separate business. You can't just like flick a switch and say, my data, I can walk into any GP in the country and share, you know, my Apple Watch data with that practice, because the current model is all built around like that practice is signed up with this product and given them access to this. So if you have a consumer facing tool, you would have to have gotten around, you know, thousands and thousands of practices and convinced them that they should enable your access to the database to be able to do that. So yeah, one of the things I'm really excited about is Halo can be an enabler to having this consumer app, you know, searchable marketplace that if I'm a clinician and I have a patient walk in and I say, I use this app and it's been tracking my, you know, diabetes basically for my lifetime, you know, can I share that data with you? And that happens to be one of those integrated apps. They can, you know, search the marketplace, go, yep, for this patient, I want to bring in the data, and it just all happens in the background.
I'm kind of imagining like the quality of data in medical facilities has to be really poor. I mean, wasn't it always historically collected by written hand?
I mean, Queensland's been going through a transformation for 10 years, putting in electronic medical records. So the baseline is so low, right? Like I remember not that long ago being at a big tertiary hospital in Brisbane and in their outpatients. And basically to get a referral from a GP, they got a fax through. They literally told me that like sometimes the fax machine spits it out and it rolls under the filing cabinet and we don't find it for we have to move the filing cabinet like once a week to make sure nothing's under there.
Sure, those hands are clean for washing.
They, you know, so they get that fax, they then enter it into one system. They then print that out because it has extra information tied to it so that they can then enter that information into a different system.
Oh my God.
And then they put that in a filing cabinet, which acts as their wait list. So it's like an ordered filing cabinet that they're using as their wait list. So, you know, it's definitely a low bar and there's so much room for improvement, but it's such a complex system that, you know, again, it's been 10 years of implementing the IMR almost, and, you know, we don't have full coverage across Queensland. Let alone, and that's in the public sector, let alone like the private hospital sector has, you know, it's even less electronic than the public sector.
In that case, is the medical industry sort of like an untapped market from that perspective?
Yes and no. I think there's an immense amount of opportunity, but it's really hard to get in the door. So, you know, it's a trade-off, right? Of like, there could be massive improvement in this space, but there are very few players that have the, you know, the scale to be able to get in the door with these giant entities in public health, at least. I know there's a lot more in the market around like the private health, private hospital sector and things like that, and particularly in the GP space, because again, it's all individual businesses and stuff like that. But yeah, the other bit is like Australia in general is a pretty small market. So if you
6,000 hospitals, didn't you say?
General practices.
Oh, general practices.
Yeah.
That's very small to me.
Like if you compare it to, the US or the UK or Canada and stuff like that, like Australia is a pretty small market. So, while I think there's massive opportunity for improvement, the market forces make that quite difficult.
Absolutely. And I guess, off the back of that, as, someone new to the, the startup world, you're the business leader, CEO of Halo Connect. What are some challenges that you've encountered throughout that process? I know it's coming up to your 2-year
it is,
mark.
I mean, loads. It's startup world, right? I guess one of the things I reflect on is the product went through a startup incubator and had an awesome team of people build like essentially a proof of concept, but a proof of concept that was like an end-to-end solution that was market ready. You could put it in a GP practice and it would do what it said on the tin.
Yeah.
But that team is focused on speed to market because it's a startup incubator. And so it doesn't have a lot of the stuff that you would want from a really robust piece of particularly middleware SaaS product that, is all about uptime and reliability. And, so I guess in the early days, we spent a lot of time reacting to stuff going wrong. We're also like deploying the software into 6,000 different IT environments that we don't control. So, I remember really in the early days, we'd worked like first few weeks, we've like worked with 40 different practices who are like in this, beta kind of thing to get it installed on their software. We push out a release, something goes wrong, with the update process and the updater doesn't have a fallback system in it. So it just uninstalls it from the 40 practices, basically. So that was fun. And I'd say the first like, 6 months or so is very, very reactive to something that's gone wrong.
Yeah.
I think then we have this like awkward middle period where we're trying to figure out, a really great roadmap with our, practice management system partners and like where do they want their APIs to go. But meanwhile, we have a development team being like, cool, what are we building? Let's go. I think that was a bit of a blessing for us that we didn't have a really clear roadmap because actually what we were able to spend our time on is sort of all the DevOps side of things, a lot of automation in terms of our releases, a lot of testing and automated end-to-end testing, release rings, like zero downtime deployments, all these things that as a third-party software vendor, you want to make sure that middleware that you're being essentially forced to use is as reliable as possible.
Yeah.
So while that hadn't really been on our radar, we kind of used it as a gap filler, and it's been it's been amazing. And if we didn't have a lot of that stuff now, I'd be a lot more nervous sort of every time we have to push out a release.
I think everyone can kind of relate to that initial stage of starting a business. And you're right, it's always reactive because you can never foresee every single challenge that's going to be right around the corner. When did you notice the shift from being a reactive business to being more proactive? And what do you think turned the tides for the company?
Yeah, it's probably about 12 to 14 months in. I think we'd settled on a really good plan, like longer term development plan with our main PMS partner. And that's not all of the types of things that we need to develop. We are like we work with multiple practice management systems. So, we have a lot of other priorities, but we at least we knew that like sort of half of every development cycle we had a plan for the next, 6+ months, probably more like 18 months. The other thing that I think really helped was we didn't like having come from EY. I love a methodology or a framework. And,
Tell us you're an executive without saying it.
Management consulting speak. Yeah. And we kind of, our CTO, who has just been incredible, he's a great teacher, a great communicator, and I wouldn't have survived without him, not being a technical leader myself. He was a big advocate for ShapeUp, which I found is this sort of really nice balance between Agile and Waterfall, where we essentially...
Sorry, can you just explain for anyone listening right now, what is Agile, Waterfall, and ShapeUp?
Yeah, so I guess different software development methodologies. Waterfall is kind of like a bit like what I used to do in these big clinical redesign projects. It's like, let's make the case for why we need to change something or build something. Let's like get all of the business requirements and think through everything that could possibly need or want or go wrong. Let's build that, and then let's pick a date and we turn it on and all of the change happens at once. That's kind of Waterfall. Agile is like, we have this massive backlog of features and bugs and different things that we want to build. And we just have our developers like bringing in the next thing constantly and kind of, these 2-week iterations basically, where you just keep adding and adding and adding. And the idea is that you're getting features out really quickly and making constant changes that are sort of adding value to a customer.
That would be more like triaging things to figure out what you're going to be for. Sorry, it's medical. I had to do it.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's more like ED, basically, where stuff's coming in through the door thick and fast, and you're trying to figure out on the fly what's the most important thing to do next. ShapeUp, which if anyone isn't familiar, the ShapeUp book is a free PDF online, I think written by the founder of Basecamp. It's this nice in between where it's geared around these like 6-week cycles. And really the aim is for every 6-week cycle, you have a feature that you're trying to develop end to end and release. And so it's kind of 2 development sprints and then a HIP sprint, which is a bit of hardening, innovation and planning. The planning bit's for the next cycle. And it means that you can kind of still have this backlog, but the backlog's at the sort of broader project or feature level rather than these like individual tickets that developers can do. And you kind of then, when you're planning for the next cycle, you decide at that point, what are we willing to bet the next 6 weeks on getting built and out and into customers' hands, and picking, I guess there's a bit of prioritization, but it's not this constant prioritization. It's sort of on a cycle. And then getting out of their way, basically. It's like, we've committed, you guys have 6 weeks to build this, fix it up, release it, go for your life, and we won't interrupt you during that time with changing priorities and things like that.
If I could sort of summarize then, the big reason you chose to go in this direction of development is that you wanted to rally around a singular purpose as a business, and that helped you align everyone on a goal that we could all work to tackle.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're able to then, I guess you've got the team building this stuff, for 6 weeks. You then have the time and headspace because you can't bother them, like leave them alone unless, the world's falling down and we're built in Azure. So Microsoft has done a few things recently that have made the world fall down. But thankfully not the Cloudflare thing. We got away with that. I guess while that's happening, you then as an executive team and a product manager and stuff, you have time and headspace to talk to customers, to talk to your PMS partners and figure out, okay, what is the next big thing that we need to tackle? And what are we going to spend the next 6 weeks after this, doing? And I think it took a little while to get into those good rhythms. We played around with 5-week cycles versus 6-week cycles and different things. But I think after that sort of 14, 15 month period, we got really good at that ShapeUp and it's made things really easy.
You're placed in a very unique position right now where you started obviously as a student, you made your way into a teacher or mentorship process, and now you're leading a business. What kind of key takeaways or advice would you have for anyone else that's kind of thinking to themselves, as well, like, I want to go through that very structured junior to senior position, but maybe they are ready for that more senior position. Maybe they are equipped to take on something that's a bit more pie in the sky.
Yeah, I think one of my partner's an IT recruiter, thankfully enough, and she referred me my first few hires, which was amazing. She'd known them for more than a decade. But she talks a bit about women in tech and gets invited to panels and things. And I've heard her speak multiple times about this sort of weird thing where a guy will look at a job application, and if he can do, you know, 10 or 20% of the requirements, he's like, you know what, I can do that.
Yeah.
And we'll put in an application. Whereas a woman might look at it, they can do 80, 90% of the requirements, but that last 10%, you know, that they're not sure of, and they're like, oh, I don't think that's a good fit for me.
I can relate to that. For
I
sure.
read about this. I read about this.
Yeah.
Men are bigger risk takers, and I hope I'm not generalizing. This is what I read, people. But it seems like women, when interviewing, will be much more hesitant to take on a position unless they are fully qualified. And that also plays a part, I heard, into things like navigating pay rises conversations, because they feel like they haven't done everything when they fail to take into account all the great things that they've accomplished for their businesses.
Yeah. And so I think my learning from that, which, you know, is true of me, this is what I've done my whole career, is look at something and be like, oh, I haven't done that before. Let's give that a shot. And I've been lucky enough to find people, you know, willing to bet on me, which has been nice. But I think, generally speaking, if you, I guess, don't wait until you can do the thing before you try to do it.
Wouldn't be much of a learning opportunity, would there?
Exactly.
I love that. Yeah.
I mean, even, I guess it was instilled in us a bit at EY as well, because like to get the promotion, you had to be doing that job already for 12 months for them to like consider you senior enough to then get the promotion.
Yeah.
So you always had to act above
true.
What your expectations were of your current role. And so, I think, you know, have a crack. You never know.
For sure. You never
I'm
know.
walking proof that people will give you jobs that you're completely unqualified for.
I'm going to apply today.
I love it. Yeah.
Matt, did you have a question?
Just one question for you, Jason, because I'm really interested in your perspective. It seems like Halo almost has three different like audiences. You've got the integrators, you've got the practices, and then you've got these PMS vendors. So even though they're all kind of connected in the workflow, I imagine they all have different priorities. They all want different things. And then you guys are in the middle trying to make everyone happy. So I guess, like, what advice do you have to other people on how to, I guess, prioritize different interests, as well as kind of dealing with different stakeholders as well?
Yeah, that's definitely true. We're lucky in a sense that our sort of philosophy for practices is to be as invisible as possible. It's like if they don't know about Halo, that's a good thing. You know,
great product.
But they know about, you know, the Cubico or Hotdoc or whatever other product might be using Halo in the background, and they have a relationship directly with them. So we do still have to deal with them. Like the software goes offline at times and we're contacting them, and we usually get I don't know what you're talking about, what's Halo, which is a good thing, largely. But I guess we mostly focus on these third-party integrators, the digital health tools, and then the practice management software vendors. And I guess it's easy to kind of get caught up with, if the practice management software vendors don't want to work with Halo, then we don't have a business. But I think it's still really important that we are an advocate for the third parties, for ultimately those third parties are our customers. They're using our product. The PMS vendor isn't really using our product.
Yeah.
And while we are trying to build things that the PMS vendors want so that they can build out their own partner networks of things they integrate with them, ultimately there's sort of like the customer comes first. We have to listen to them. We have to be an advocate for them just as much as they are like with the PMS vendor to say, well, they're all telling us they really want this. And I know that you don't want this for this other reason, but have you considered this? So it is tough. I mean, I come from a government world for a long time where, I had 50 different departments in a hospital that we're trying to align around a single priority. So hopefully that kind of experience has helped with sort of, managing all these different parties. But I think you do have to pick like, who is the most important voice? Who is this product ultimately for? And then be an advocate for them while, working really closely with your other stakeholders.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing all your insights. Like, it's like a lot to,
It's definitely my favorite conversation.
Take away. Yeah. It's been so good. We wrap up every podcast with one last question. So what has been your favorite software over your lifetime in business and why?
I had a little bit of a think about this, and I think I've gone for what I think is probably the most underrated bit of software that I've ever come across, and that is a knowledge management system. So at EY, you're a junior, they say, pull together a proposal for improving operating theatre efficiency at a, metro network of hospitals. And you're like, okay, well, I'm going to be here till 4 a.m. every night for the next week. But actually, they have this fantastic knowledge management system, which is it's kind of like an intranet, except that it works really well, where you basically have all of the proposals and reports and work done globally for the entire organization. So, you can search by industry and keyword and do all these things. And like, it's 10 seconds later, you have, 5 amazing examples of previous proposals doing very, very similar work in, different geographies around the world. To lean on. And that was like indispensable there. I think I reflect on places that haven't done it well. And my favorite story is there's a hospital I was in where the director of surgery sort of comes to work early one day, walks into the offices, and there's water like leaking through the roof. And then this like bucket crashes down through the roof, lands next to him, pushes water everywhere. And it turns out that basically, there'd been a leak in the roof for a really, really long time that maintenance couldn't fix. And so it became like one person's job to periodically replace the bucket so that it would never overflow. And it turns out this person left, and nobody knew that was a thing that anybody had to do. Which I guess, it's the opposite of knowledge management. And then at Halo, I guess it's much smaller scale, obviously, than a place like EY, but we use a tool called Notion, which has been great. It's sort of like an organizational wiki. So, but we try to use it. We try and document like as much as humanly possible. So it's not just like our policies and procedures, but it's like, work instructions for doing everything you could possibly want to do, email templates, all the previous comms that we've ever sent out, really granular stuff. Like, here's the exact JSON body to send to do this exact thing on the API. In case anyone's ever trying to do it. So the whole point is like, no one ever needs to reinvent the wheel. Everything we've done is documented in some way, and someone can find it.
Jason, you've been absolutely wonderful on the show. I want to thank you for taking the time to come out here and share some of this information about your experiences. Really appreciate your time, mate.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you so much.
Cheers.
Perfect. Thanks, Jason.
Thanks for tuning in to The Tech Panel. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn. A huge thank you to our major sponsor, SmoothLink Integrations. Stay connected and keep up with all the latest in tech.